on the desert to feed small flocks of sheep and goats. And enough brackish wells to water them. There are plenty of fish in the sea, and plenty of fishermen to catch them. And nowadays, Kuwaitis even drink the sea itself, for they have harnessed natural gas from the oil fields to distill some 6 million gallons of seawater every day into drinking water as pure as any you will find. But Kuwait still has to import huge quantities of food, 700 miles by lorry across the desert from the more temperate lands of Jordan, Syria and the Lebanon, or by dhow from more fertile neighbors on the Gulf itself. Most of these imports are seasonal, and so Kuwaitis are turning more and more to the year-round supplies of the modern food store, the frozen package and the tin, brought thousands of miles by sea and correspondingly expensive. To be almost entirely dependent on other countries for one's food is something no one wants. So the Kuwaiti government have set up an experimental farm of 100 acres or so to try and see what can be done. The farm works in close collaboration with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the FAO. And it has provided the FAO with a lot of useful information on arid zone cultivation. Most of the water used on the farm is brackish, containing 4,000 parts per million of dissolved salts, a very high proportion. Quite a large variety of trees and vegetables and fruit and crops have been grown with brackish water, but in many cases the yield has been disappointingly small. Some things have proved surprisingly tolerant to brackish, including certain grain crops. Most tolerant of all is alfalfa grass, which makes an excellent fodder for cattle and poultry. So they imported cattle from Europe to see if they could stand the summer climate. They found that the cattle thrive if they're properly cared for. They provide milk for the Kuwait hospitals, and now they're being crossed with the hardy local breeds to try and produce a tough strain with a high milk yield. Poultry thrive too. A variety of breeds from Europe and America have taken to Kuwait like ducks to water. Water for irrigation must always take second place to drinking water. So despite the recent discovery of fresh water underground, the lack of adequate supplies is still a major problem. If brackish water is used for too long, the soil becomes saline and exhausted. When that happens, the only thing to do is to dig out the topsoil and put in fresh sand. With a desert on your doorstep, this presents no particular problem, but it does cost money. One solution, both to the water and the soil problems, is this one, hydroponics, which is now being tried out commercially by a private firm, as well as by the farm. This method of cultivation requires no soil and yields 16 times as much per gallon of water as an equivalent area of sand. But the initial cost is high. Seedlings are planted out in concrete tanks filled with vermiculite, a processed mineral of the mica family which gives a high porosity and retains moisture. Chemical foods are mixed and added to water which has been stored underground to reduce evaporation. A proportion of brackish water can be used, provided the beds are flushed out with fresh water from time to time. The water is pumped into the beds at regular intervals and then drained off and used again, with very little loss. Sunlight is filtered by screens, and pest control is easy. But inevitably, all these features add to the high cost. One of the biggest problems in Kuwait is that in the summer months, when the temperature averages 114 degrees Fahrenheit, things just don't grow at all. But the growing season can be extended by several weeks by growing seedlings in a refrigerated greenhouse like this one. The seedlings can be planted out as soon as the weather outside is cool enough. In this way, a whole additional crop can be harvested every season, and at a time when no imported produce is available. But here again, the cost of such an elaborate installation is bound to be high, so the produce is expensive. The experimental farm acts as a nursery to the public authorities in an effort to make this desert city a pleasant place to live in. In the middle of the town, a large public garden is being laid out for everyone to enjoy. Schools get special priority, and many of their gardens are several years older than the children who enjoy them. The farm is also at the service of the ordinary citizen. He's given advice in planning his garden and in selecting the right plants. He can go to the nursery himself and pick and choose to his heart's content, and with expert help. The farm tries to encourage people to grow their own vegetables, and so reduce the strain on limited supplies. Some people are experimenting with hydroponics in their own backyards. In this modified system, a simple trench is filled with vermiculite. The water is lost, but the yield is high and the cost is low. The scale is still small, and the cost of growing things in Kuwait is still high. But as the scale gets bigger, the cost will come down. And meanwhile, Kuwait has the means to persevere. The lessons learned here are being passed on through the FAO to less fortunate countries with the same problems, but without the means to experiment for themselves. The problems are vast, but 2/3 of the people in the world are badly undernourished, and deserts are an anachronism the world can ill afford, whatever the cost of conquering them. Here in Kuwait, a start has been made. A generation is growing up with new green fingers and new responsibilities to the world around them. For thousands of years, man has been a trespasser on the desert's silent face. Now, suddenly, his knowledge begins to flow along the channels of his needs. And very slowly, an acre at a time, he begins to challenge the desert's harsh immensity.
Without movement. But everywhere there is life. Everywhere there is life and death. Into the lonely desert came a new industry, and on a bare ridge of sand, where not even a village existed previously, a new town has come into being, set in green gardens in the middle of the desert. It is a town that exists because of oil. The great oil tanks dominate wide, tree-lined streets that were built for modern traffic. Typical of Arabia today, old traditions are retained in new buildings and new ways of life. A modern city has been built around a modern industry.
This is the administrative headquarters of Kuwait Oil Company. In a sense, it's the nerve center of Ahmadi. Nobody will deny that Ahmadi is here because of the oil operations. The whole town has been built since 1948. The name Ahmadi is in honor of a former ruler, Sheikh Ahmed al-Jabir al-Sabah. The growth of the town and this building illustrates the cooperation between the state and the company.
The complex operations of an oil company require considerable staff. They often have to live in sparsely inhabited places. It is an early necessity to provide for them. In fact, to create a town. Ahmadi is such a town. A prime need was houses for employees. In the early days, these were often imported prefabricated buildings, assembled on the site. But soon more permanent dwellings were erected, and today, Ahmadi has a large variety of architectural styles. Set in green gardens, they would grace any city in any country. But Ahmadi is part of the governorate of His Excellency, Sheikh Jabir al-Abdallah al-Jabir al-Sabah. In an interview, he speaks of some of the problems associated with development in this area.
It's natural with the increase of the population in the area that problems, simple problems, do increase. But we are always trying to solve such problems, which include the relationship between the labor force and the companies. Secondly, the existence of the trade union in the area, which is supervised by the Ministry of Social Affairs, helps to resolve whatever problems might arise. But thank God, we have no such problems at present. The government has started several projects in the area. Are there any new projects planned for the future? Yes, it is true, the government has built many installations and facilities in the area, such as model schools and clinics, and the project which, God willing, we shall put into effect in the future is the Shuaiba project.
Relationships between the state of Kuwait and the company are handled by the General Oil Affairs Department. The state has a guest house for important visitors who wish to see the oil operations. It is an interesting building in the modern Arab style. The state schools in Ahmadi are as well equipped as any in Kuwait, where all children receive free education. Ahmadi schools are notable for their peaceful settings in beautiful gardens. Some services were originated by the company and were later handed over to the state. These shops were built to cater for demands in the Ahmadi area and form part of a scheme developed by the state and the company in partnership. The shops are leased from the state and are run by private shopkeepers. The state operates the post office in this shopping area. The public security and state fire services, which are based in the Ahmadi governorate, often go into action together. An emergency such as this is another example of cooperation between the state and the company. For road casualties in Ahmadi are taken to the company's Southwell Hospital. This hospital, named after a former managing director of Kuwait Oil Company, is organized on the most up-to-date lines and is excellently equipped. It is primarily for company employees and their families, and so is complementary to the highly developed state medical services. Laboratories and specialized departments have all the latest techniques for diagnosis and treatment. The basis of all hospitals is personal attention. The staff of the Southwell Hospital are highly trained and dedicated to the care of their patients. No one gets better attention than the babies. Every possible device to give them a good start in life is installed, and the maternity ward has a proud record. No less the children's ward, for the care of children has its own rewards in their hopeful faces and dependence on help. But the best thing is to keep them well. Instruction in child care is given to all mothers at the hospital, both before and after their babies are born. This is followed up by the home visiting service. Trained staff keep in touch with families and are available for advice and consultation on their health problems. Families and homes are very important in Ahmadi. Every encouragement is given to help improve houses, grow gardens, to center interest on the home and family life. A great deal of entertaining takes place in the home, where many friends meet. Ahmadi is well provided with clubs. They are centers for recreation and social life, and they're always crowded in the evenings and at weekends. The spectators are a critical audience, and there is no shortage of experts. The clubs also organize outdoor games, and football is as popular here as in other countries. Ahmadi can turn out first-class football and hockey teams for the many competitions held up and down the Gulf. In fact, you can enjoy most sports in Ahmadi. Skeet shooting is a sport that comes naturally to Arabs with their long association with hunting. And there is keen competition with American and British sportsmen. As might be expected in a climate where the temperatures run very high in summer, swimming has a big following, and swimming galas are always festive occasions. The three main clubs at Ahmadi all have magnificent swimming pools. In summer, they're rarely empty. Golf, on the other hand, seems a long way from its native Scotland, but it has many steady devotees and is increasing in popularity. Perhaps the most popular aspects of the clubs are the children's playgrounds. Activity is always in full swing. Sometimes you get a slightly upside-down view of life. It's all very puzzling. But a town must not only live, it must grow. And growth means the emergence of the young. For those who wish to make the oil industry their career, the company maintains a training center at which they can further their studies.
She isn't gone. Because no, she isn't what?
No, she isn't eating.
No, she isn't eating.
Young men straight from school enroll as full-time trainees and commence basic classes that extend their education towards their chosen goals. Later, they learn to acquire special skills, which equip them for a wide range of employment opportunities. Those skilled workers who wish to improve their knowledge may return to the training department where they're taught by expert instructors. Some are being trained for staff positions, and a proportion of these will go overseas for advanced training.
نزل ستة بننزل ستة تنزل ستة شو صار عندنا يا ماجد؟ صار عندنا 576 على
At evening classes, English speakers are taught Arabic, and Arabs are taught English.
Thank you, that's enough. We continue?
There were 15,000 people there.
Thank you.
And so the desert has blossomed. Not just with the tiny desert flowers struggling for life, but with the vigorous growth of well-cultivated gardens. Many varieties of plants from all over the world bloom here. These flowers are growing where not even a village existed previously, where camels grazed the hardy desert shrubs. Where there was nothing more lasting than the footprints of animals, there is now a town that has grown and become a place on the map. But a town does not exist in buildings and gardens. The real identity of a town lies in the faces of its people. Their personality gives the town its character. In the children is its development. Ahmadi that rose from the lonely desert is part of the history of a modern state, the symbol of a great modern industry which the state and the company have created together. The formal inauguration is to be performed by the Emir of Kuwait, His Highness Sheikh Sabah Al Salim Al Sabah.
Your Highness Sheikh Sabah Al Salim Al Sabah, and Your Highness Sheikh
رئيس إدارة الشركة صاحب السمو أمير البلاد المعظم.
Once the speeches of welcome are over, His Highness is invited to press the button and so start the loading of the tanker. 15,000 tons of crude oil loaded every hour, more than Britain's hourly consumption. Crude oil being pumped along the first 48-inch submarine pipeline to the world's first loading terminal for tankers of over 300,000 tons. Since Kuwait first exported oil in 1946, the production figures have climbed phenomenally to make her a leading oil producer, not only in the Middle East, but in the world. The prosperity of her people has risen simultaneously. The old walled Arab city of 1950 has given way to the ultra-modern Kuwait city, capital and home of 50% of the population. This is the heart of the state of Kuwait, where fresh water was a luxury 20 years ago. 20 miles south of this bay, on which Kuwait city stands, a new oil town has been created since World War II. This is Ahmadi, with its port, Mina al-Ahmadi, the scene of our port expansion project, an extension to these existing facilities. Kuwait Oil Company pioneered oil prospecting before 1939 and started production and expanded rapidly after the Second World War. This expansion necessitated that the company kept abreast and indeed ahead of the oil world in many technical developments. With its port handling more oil than any other single port in the world, the company has kept pace. The construction of the Sea Island Terminal is the present climax. The building of bigger and bigger tankers was the determining factor behind the port expansion project. In 1948, the supertankers had been vessels of 28,000 tons. They steadily increased in size until by the mid-60s, oilmen's thoughts ran to more than 10 times the 1948 tanker's size, to 300,000 tons and more. In 1967, orders were placed in Japan for the first 6 tankers which were to top 326,000 tons each. The wife of Kuwait's ambassador in London, His Excellency Sheikh Salam Al Sabah, flew to Japan to name one of them. The tankers went into service in September 1968. They substantially reduced delivery costs as they trek round the Cape to European markets. For these giants, Suez will always be closed. Their draft is too great.
And if Suez is too shallow, so too were the existing terminals. In southwest Ireland, at Bantry Bay, a giant tank farm with deep water anchorage was created. At the production end in the Middle East, Kuwait Oil Company, with loading facilities already capable of handling up to 200,000-ton tankers, moved quickly. At the oil port, existing piers were in water too shallow for the new giant tankers to load fully, so the facilities had to be expanded. This was done by taking the facilities out to the natural deep water channel some 10 miles offshore. To have extended the channel to shore by dredging was rejected on grounds of cost. An artificial island 10 miles out was the answer and the focal point of the port expansion project. To this would be run a 48-inch submarine pipeline. This diameter of pipe had never been laid at sea before. Alongside it, to supply the tankers with fuel, a 20-inch bunker line. The submarine line was to feed from the 2 existing crude oil tank farms. This meant a spur from the existing southern line and a completely new gravity flow line from the North Tank farm. About half a mile from the water's edge, a new pump house with a huge gas turbine-driven pump would boost the oil flow to 15,000 tons an hour along the 10 miles to Sea Island Terminal. A microwave radio link would carry all control and telecommunication circuits between the Sea Island and the existing Ahmadi Control Centre ashore. The consulting engineers had started their investigation in mid-1966. Well within 12 months, the contractors were appointed and at work. Test piles were being sunk at the Sea Island location. And it was a busy time as well for the port, with a flurry of unloading. Materials came in all shapes and sizes. The assembly of plant and equipment gathered together from specialist suppliers the world over. Pipe lengths. Wherever there is oil, there is the need for pipelines. There were 2 shiploads of spiral-welded pipe to make up the 17 miles of 48-inch line and 10 miles of 20-inch line. Like busy but lumbering ants, articulated trucks shuttled back and forth from the pier. The mainland pipeline was from the North Tank farm, along the route surveyed in 1966 by KOC's Engineering Technical Services, and the laying of the land line by contractors was a straightforward operation. After the 40-foot sections of pipe were welded, the line was primed and wrapped by a line-traveling machine, the first machine of its kind supplied for tape-coating 48-inch pipe. By April 1968, only a scar across the desert, a mound at the beach, remained as evidence of the finished pipeline. In total, some 8,500 tons of pipe were imported in 40-foot lengths, and those for the submarine part of the line were taken to the pipe coating yard, set up just south of Mina al-Ahmadi. The first half of the run from shore was pipe of half-inch wall thickness, and the rest, to go in deeper water, was of 5/8 of an inch wall thickness. The pipe had to be cleaned of its rust. Shot blasting is usually employed at this stage, but here sand was used instead of shot. Not the common or garden desert sand, but loads of sharp sand, like this sample brought in from the waddies. Rust is steel's greatest enemy. If left unprotected, corrosion significantly reduces steel's useful life. Steps are taken to protect such pipelines. Various coatings and wrappings are applied. Bitumen, felt and fiberglass are the materials used. But even so, corrosion could take place at any flaw or damage in the wrapping. To put the matter in simplest form, the rust is caused by electric currents generated by the interaction of water on metal. Electrolytic action. This action can be stopped by deliberately passing another electric current along the pipe to neutralize the natural ones. This is known as cathodic protection and is applied after the pipe is in the water. One important function of the wrapping is to reduce the amount of artificial current required. A submarine pipeline has to be weighted with a dense concrete to stop it floating, and the densest aggregate for this concrete was magnetite, iron ore, from north of the Arctic Circle. 32,000 tons of it was imported to produce a concrete with a density of 218 pounds per cubic foot. Ordinary aggregate would have demanded double thickness of concrete to reach the required weighting. This would have been too unwieldy and expensive. The concrete was reinforced with double wire mesh, giving extra strength. Thanks to the use of quick-setting concrete, these molds were used twice a day to give a high rate of production. All the pipe lengths were ready before the submarine part of the operation started. These finished 40-foot lengths weighed 28 tons each. A boat or two drawn up on the beach between Mina al-Ahmadi and the fishing village of Fahil. This tranquility was disturbed by the contractor's men as they hand-dug the last few yards of trench to avoid damaging existing oil pipelines and service cables at the beachhead. This was late March 1968. The trench was continued down the beach by a dragline excavator. The pipe must always be covered for protection. Beyond the reach of the dragline, 16 tons of explosives were used to blast a trench in obstinate rock. The pipe was laid at sea by a lay barge. She got as close inshore as she could, ran a line from her winches round a block on the beach and back to the pipe head on her ramp. Then she pulled in the first half mile of each pipe. The 20-inch was first, with oil drums on it for extra buoyancy. The pull was smooth and completed overnight. Immediately afterwards, the first sections of 48-inch pipe were welded up to be pulled ashore in the same way. The 48-inch line required the help of 35 drums per 40-foot length to make it float. Both pipes were very accurately positioned to tie up with the land sections. One of the minor spectacles of a pipe pull, the divers releasing the barrels. The lay barge carried on with the rest of the 48-inch line, leaving the 20-inch capped on the seabed to be picked up and finished later. Whenever you watch a pipeline being laid in water, you get the impression of the pipe moving. This is an illusion. It's only a relative movement. In fact, it's the barge moving forward and leaving the pipe behind, like this. As each 40-foot length is added to the string, it's welded to the previous length, there being several welding stations for the multiple passes the welders have to make to complete each butt. The welded butts are also X-rayed and given protective coatings. As it pulls forward on anchors, the barge lets the pipe slide in a safe curve down the pontoon to the seabed. Later, it'll be buried in the seabed for safety by a dredge barge. Work goes on round the clock in 2 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. The welders had had long experience of this work. Each butt was radiographed by an X-ray tube strapped to the outside of the pipe. 3 X-rays were made from different positions to get a complete coverage of the butt, and the team of radiographers had to work fast to keep pace with the welders. Once a butt had been passed as 100% sound by the inspectors, a coating of bitumen dope was applied to it, and then a metal sheet wrapped around and strapped to make a form. Into this form was poured a hot bituminous mixture of rock and cement. This solidified as it was cooled to protect the exposed metal of the joint. The pipe curves down to the seabed, and the concrete coating acts as a weight to keep the pipe on the bottom, not as a watertight protection to the pipe. Although handling the largest diameter pipe ever laid at sea at this time, the pipe-laying barge conducted a smooth and uneventful operation. An average of 2,400 feet was laid per day, and only 1 day's delay was experienced due to bad weather. Ahead of the lay barge, the location loomed gradually nearer until 16 days after the start, she was pulling alongside another barge, working on the first of the Sea Island dolphins. To get an exact fit, the surveyors checked the precise length the last section of pipe would have to be. This done, and the pipe cut and laid, the right-angled riser piece was brought out from shore to be lowered into place. The pipe lay had taken 19 days. The valves at the head are for high-pressure connections when the pipe is to be tested. Right away, the lay barge moved inshore again to pick up that capped 20-inch line which had been pulled up the beach and left. It was laid in exactly the same way as the 48-inch line. On the completion of the 20-inch line, both risers were left fastened to the temporary pile, awaiting the construction later of the Sea Island. At the outset of the project, a steel fabrication yard had been established nearby on the coast. This is where some of the Sea Island structures were fabricated or fitted out before being taken to location. In designing the structures, the consulting engineers had considered various plans, but finally settled for this construction, where hollow leg templates were built ashore. Here the structure is lying on its side. Then, with their hollow legs sealed and extra buoyancy tanks fitted, they were pulled into the sea to be floated to location. When there, the tanks were to be removed and the legs flooded to allow them to sink neatly into place. There was to be a template like this one for each of 6 small platforms known as dolphins. It was set on the seabed, and through its hollow legs, piles were driven to the required penetration. Remember, they're standing in 100 feet of water. A deck section was placed on top of the legs. 2 more dolphins were constructed to the right of this, and leaving a space in the middle, 3 more further to the right. Companionways were to bridge between dolphins. In the gap were set 4 breasting dolphins, 2 each side, against which the tankers would berth. Look at it in plan and see the layout. There's the empty space awaiting the centerpiece of the complex, the loading island. This loading island first saw the light of day in a Greek shipyard as a single float unit, 160 feet long by 138 feet wide and 12 feet deep. It was built with all component parts, such as control room, deck house, crude and bunker lines, service lines, loading arm supports, floodlight towers, walkways, and most of the electrical and mechanical installations built within the hull. To conform with maritime regulations, she was named, and then Sue Heil was towed from Greece through the Mediterranean and round the Cape, 12,000 miles to Kuwait. On arrival in Kuwait waters, 76 days later, Sue Heil first went to location, where the big crane could lift and position her long tubular legs. Then into the fabrication yard for final fitting out. Here in the yard, the loading arms were positioned and attached. This was one of the jobs which could only be done after the voyage, for risk of storm damage. Under tow, back to location and her final position. This was the last dozen miles of her very long journey. Ahead, out on location, work was in progress on the 3rd of the breasting dolphins, against which the tankers would berth. Each breasting dolphin is supported on 3 6-foot diameter steel piles, driven to 75 feet penetration and capped by a braced deck structure. This was the final maneuver for the Sue Heil. Once in place, she was to become a loading platform for 2 tankers, both of which could be of over 300,000 tons. She was carefully maneuvered into place, surveyors guiding her to the precise position. When in place, her 6 legs were brought into play. They were jacked down and then driven and drilled 60 feet into the seabed. We're only showing 2 legs here for simplicity. The Sue Heil was jacked up. Companionways linked her to the rest of the structure, and Sue Heil became the heart of Sea Island, with the submarine line connecting her to shore. As the Sea Island neared completion, work on the pump house ashore was progressing rapidly. It was to house a gas turbine, the pumping unit, and fail-safe equipment. The power of the gas turbine, a Rolls-Royce Avon jet engine, driven by natural gas, is 11,300 brake horsepower, which can pump up to 15,000 tons of oil an hour into giant tankers. A revolution not only in oil's transportation, but in its loading. Almost 1/3 of 1 million tons of oil loaded in 1 day's work for the pump. Millions of pounds worth of oil leaving Kuwait's man-made island, the first loading terminal in the world for tankers of over 300,000 tons.